thank you for joining us today. My name is Suraya Turk, and today I'll be moderating this session. Today we have Legal Circle, which is a law firm based in UAE, Grant Thornton, an accounting and auditing firm, and Sharjah Research Technology and Innovation Park. So thank you for the panelists joining us today. I'll go through in just a moment and speak and do an introduction. I'll just first very briefly speak about Legal Circle and who we are and why we're hosting today's session. So we all know that during the coronavirus, all businesses or various businesses have had different struggles. It's really about collaborating, and it's about joining forces with other experts in the industry to really navigate and to find practical commercial solutions during this time to be able to support you. So as a law firm based in the UAE, in particular in Sharjah, we have a strong reputation for being agile, nimble, and passionate in our commitment to finding practical legal and commercial solutions for our clients. We try to be adaptive during these times and are coming up with innovative and cost-effective legal solutions. So today we join Grant Thornton and Sharjah Research Technology and Innovation Park to bring to you a topic which we believe is critical at this time when businesses are really evaluating their position in the market and, I guess, thinking of how they can move forward into the future when the future at this stage is very unknown, if I can put it that way. So today we have joining us Richard Brady, partner of Legal Circle. Richard is an internationally qualified British lawyer with over 40 years of experience in the industry. Richard is also a qualified online legal trainer and head of our legal online training, has provided and does provide training for law firms, corporations and audit companies in Europe, Africa, and across the Middle East and Asia. Today, Richard will be speaking about the benefits and some of the reasons why a company may be looking at corporate restructuring, including how and where to start if you are considering this. Next speaker will be Mr. Hisham Farouk. Mr. Hisham is the CEO of Grant Thornton UAE. He has over 20 years experience leading high-profile advisory engagements for some of the largest groups in the region. Hisham is a member of the Board of Governors for Grant Thornton, driving the strategic division of the brand globally, as well as in the Middle East. And Hisham today will talk about the considerations for change in the current environment by looking at the operational and financial and business strategies that need to be considered when restructuring. Thirdly, we will hear from Mr. Hussain. Mr. Hussain Mohammed, His Excellency is the CEO of Sharjah Research Technology and Innovation Park, and also of American University of Sharjah Enterprises. Both these entities were established through the royal decree by the ruler of Sharjah, who also directly appointed His Excellency Hussain to responsibilities in order to create a collaborative long-term relationship between industry, academia, and the public and private sector, fostering an ecosystem of enterprise and innovation. So Hussain will look at innovation across industries and the UAE and the regional landscape in the UAE, including an introduction about Sharjah Technology Research and Innovation Park and the ecosystem that it is providing. So without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Mr. Richard Brady, who will take over from here. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much, Suraya. Hello, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us. And I want to talk, if I may, first of all, about the different reasons why you might want to restructure a company, and then possibly the different ways in which you'll go about it. That will, of course, include, when I say the reasons, possible benefits. There are many reasons why companies might restructure. Virtually all of them are intended to produce some kind of benefit. Now, some of these benefits might be financial. It could be reviving a declining business or increasing a company's value so that you can sell it. It might be to prepare it for transfer to the next generation of management. Other reasons include gaining a competitive advantage, perhaps by positioning the company for growth, allowing for the addition of new accounts. However, there are two words really which sum up why you would want to restructure a company. They are survival and success. Now, the business world changes. No better example of that than the situation we're going through now. And if you stay stuck in your same routine of business transaction methods, you'll get left behind. Companies that refuse to change with the times face the risk of their product line or their working practices becoming obsolete. So, of course, businesses experiment with new products. They explore new markets. They continually reach out to new groups of customers. They look to areas where they can increase their capacity for business. Now, all of these changes require restructuring. For example, an expansion to an overseas market may need changes to the staff profiles or changes in work policies. Starting a new product line may require changes in the system of work. Hiving off or selling off unprofitable or unneeded business lines to concentrate on your core business will need restructuring. Another reason, again, possibly brought about by the coronavirus situation, is to downsize. A very common reason for restructuring a company is to downsize the workforce. The changing nature of the economy and working practices may need you to alter the way in which the management is structured or the number of workers you have. Cutthroat competition and pressure on margins from competitors who adopt a low price strategy may require you to restructure your staff or your inventory or other measures to reduce your costs and achieve efficiency. In this case, you're going to need to rework your job descriptions, rework your communication structures, and downsizing often induces a flatter organizational structure, which makes decision-making easier. The third reason is new work methods. The traditional organizational system meant we went into the office at 9 and left at 5. Well, that's changed. I doubt after the coronavirus situation has finished that we will all go back to working 9 to 5 from the office. This may require organizational structuring within the company, and also different parameters as to monitoring management indicators, benefits. The newer work method may require placing emphasis on results rather than the methods, and it will certainly require strong communication policy. Also, new managerial methods will come in. This may require restructuring of the company. This really is summed up in the term quality management. You will find 20 years ago, the idea of flat management system wasn't in force in many companies. There was a strict hierarchy. The modern method is to give greater control and discretion to managers, to line managers. So this allows them to make decisions which really are just monitored by the board of directors. By reducing the management waste, the layers that aren't needed, you can relocate personnel and possibly reduce the number needed. Another reason you might want to restructure is technology. Innovations in technology, just like the one we have now, where we're all speaking to each other from different parts of the world without having to get on a plane to speak and see each other. This technology-centric change can be part of a business process engineering. And those companies that don't get on board may find their systems and procedures turning obsolete. Now, of course, you will think of restructuring in terms of mergers and acquisitions. What is the essential objective of a company? It is the maximization of long-term profits. In today's corporate world, where survival of the fittest is the maxim, then mergers and acquisitions are commonplace. And any merger or acquisition invariably heralds a restructuring exercise, probably before it takes place, to make the target company appear as attractive and cost-effective as possible. And then once the company has been taken over or merged, there'll be restructuring again, maybe changes in the shareholders, maybe changes in the share structure. Reconciling the systems and procedures of merged organizations to ensure that the new entity has a consistent approach with its new parent often engenders a restructuring organization, as does eliminating duplication of work or systems, such as having 2 human resource departments or 2 finance departments. Why would you need that? One of them has to go. And then, of course, there's restructuring for finance. I anticipate many of you are watching because of the difficult financial times we're in. Very often, small and medium-scale businesses have very informal structures and reporting relationships and what you might call ad hoc, on the hoof decision-making processes. If you want to raise capital for your company, you're going to have to present a structured, systematic management system. You're going to need to restructure that and then apply for finance. And when you apply for finance, there are lots of different ways in which you will need to restructure the company in order to give equity in exchange for cash or capital. And of course, there's the terrible scenario of when your company is facing bankruptcy. This can force restructuring upon a company who may wish to give equity to the creditors in exchange for them releasing some of the debt or providing easier credit terms. Another reason for restructuring is buyouts. Sometimes the managers can see that they can run the company very effectively and they restructure the company in order to raise the finance, in order to leverage a buyout from the owners of the company. Restructuring will allow the new owners to reshuffle key personnel and start with a clean slate, to have greater control. Also to cut out inefficiencies which they noticed during their period in management. And another reason is, of course, statutory and legal compliance. Jurisdictions, governing law of the UAE in relation to the 2015 Commercial Companies Law, engendered a number of changes in companies law. Companies may need to restructure their shareholding to comply with it. So those are what you might call the 10 reasons for restructuring a company. What I'd like to look at now, just to mention in passing, some of the different ways of restructuring a company. Now, what you will find is that restructuring usually only takes place when all the what you might call business as usual solutions have been tried by the existing management and found not to work. It's generally only then that the senior executives and owners believe, finally, the company can't continue as it is. Then they start looking for alternatives. That's when they start looking at restructuring. I'm going to run through some of the options. They're not all the options, but some of the options that you might want to think about if you're thinking about restructuring. First of all, a corporate realignment. This looks at analyzing the entire business and developing a plan to reorganize the firm's operating units into the most profitable and efficient business structure. This can include transfers of business units into separate units. They may be spin-offs or split-offs. It can often result in the release of capital or the revaluing of capital. Companies that are large conglomerates are generally said to be worth overall 30% less than the total value of all their separate units if the separate units were sold off individually. And that's where we come back to the idea of spin-offs and split-ups. A spin-off is when a company forms a new company, provides it with some assets, and then the shares of this new company are given to the company that the parent. In that way, of course, the shareholders of the parent still benefit from the shares in the new company, and there's usually a close alignment between the two. They may even share directors. A split up is much more interesting. This is when, for different reasons, shareholders or directors or both can't stand each other and they don't want to deal with each other. Or maybe shareholders or investors don't want to invest in the whole company but only want to invest in one arm. And what happens is the existing company puts assets into a new company which it sets up. Some of the existing shareholders may go to this new company. That's fine. In return for shares in the new company, they will give up their shares in the old company, like a divorce. They will go off on their own with their own directors and trade on their own. So that's another method of restructuring. There's also the suggestion of liquidation. Now, not many companies want to go into liquidation, but remember, it may well be that it's not being forced upon you because of financial hardship. It may just be that the time for your company has finally finished. I remember the film where they gave the analogy of somebody making whips for horses to whip up the horses in a carriage. The last surviving company that made buggy whips probably made great buggy whips, but the time for making buggy whips is gone. The time has passed, and it's time to sell up the company, take the capital, and invest in a new venture. Well, we've looked at what I called managed exits and demergers with split-offs and split-ups. There may also be debt for equity swaps, which I mentioned. You have a lot of debt, can't quite manage to service it. Perhaps you can change the corporate structure to exchange some of the equity or shares with your creditors in return for them reducing the debt that you owe. And don't forget, once they own some of the shares, they won't want to see it go into liquidation. They'll want to see it succeed. Now, how would you start? Well, the last part is this. Any restructuring starts with the directors. There must be an initiative from the directors. A quorum of directors must approve the suggestion. It must then be put to the shareholders at a special shareholders meeting. Now, depending upon which jurisdiction you're in, depending which of the governing law of the company, depending upon what the memorandum of association says, as well as the internal bylaws, you may need more than a simple majority of shareholders or shares that are represented by shareholders at the meeting. You can insist, when the company is set up, that the memorandum of association requires a supermajority of 60% of the shareholders before you can make any disposition of the assets. So you must look very closely at the jurisdiction, and you must look very closely at the corporate documents setting up the structure of the company. And I think, well, I want to look very quickly, if I may, at debt restructuring. What is debt restructuring? Well, basically it's restructuring your debts. And how do we do that? Well, one way is to go to your creditors and say, we'll give you shares in the company if you reduce the amount of our debts or you reduce the interest payments. A second is to go to the lenders who have lent money through bonds and to say to them, we cannot survive if we keep paying the interest that is specified on the bond. And the bond holders, rather than seeing the company go into liquidation and get no money, may agree to what is called a bondholder haircut. In other words, they get less than they originally agreed. And of course, there are informal debt repayment agreements. We spoke about this briefly last week, but the simple fact is, if you've got a lot of debts, don't hide your head in the sand. Go and speak to your creditors. Tell them what the problem is, and tell them the risk is that if they don't agree to take less money or make the terms easier, then they bear the risk, because your company will go out into liquidation and they won't get any money. I'm not going to deal with Chapter 11 bankruptcy, I don't think, because it relates to USA companies. But debt restructuring as opposed to debt refinancing, well, that's pretty easy. Restructuring means changing the debts. Refinancing just means finding a new lender to lend you money at a better rate of interest. Whatever it is, whatever way you approach your plans to make yourself more efficient or to survive a difficult financial time, it takes time to plan the restructure. Excellent planning is essential. Now, quite frankly, I know we're going to hear from an auditor in a moment, but I have to tell you this as well as a lawyer. Enlisting the guidance of a qualified professional at the planning stage is essential to ensure a successful restructure. You must plan first, and then you can implement the plan effectively. So first of all, work out what areas need to be restructured. Is it debts? Is it staff? Is it shareholders? Second, identify the weaknesses that the present situation is causing, and then create detailed short-term and long-term plans to correct the restructure, to correct the weakness through a restructure. And then implement short-term corrective action that will make the company look better, make it look more attractive for new bidders buying the shares, then calculate the amount you need and obtain that funding, then restructure. And then continue as before. Now, all of this requires expert guidance. And I have to tell you that because of the different legal considerations, not only under the commercial companies law in the UAE, but also because of general companies law, which affects the DIFC and the Abu Dhabi Financial Center, it's best to speak to both a lawyer and an auditor before you embark upon this venture to set sail again into the world of business. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Obviously, at the Legal Circle, we can help you, but I will leave all that to Suraya to tell you about what the Legal Circle does. And we'll happily take some questions at the end, provided I haven't spoken for too long. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Richard. I was just about to say there was a scenario that we were going to run through. What we might do is just put that to the end so that we can move on, hopefully, to Hisham and Hussain without any further delays. But just at this point, because we will stop speaking about I guess, what we can do to support you legally, I'll just quickly run through what we can do to help. So obviously, as Richard has just said, if you are looking at restructuring or considering this during this period, we can definitely give you advice on corporate restructuring. We can have consultations to understand what your requirements are. We can help you to plan, implement, and execute. Obviously, advise you on all your legal matters, do a legal health check to determine where you're at this time. If you are considering but unsure of whether you should restructure or not. If you are a company that has multi-jurisdictional entities and you need to look at the cross-jurisdictional issues, we can help with that as well. And of course, within the UAE, we can liaise and support you with any of the regulatory authorities and requirements. So I won't speak too much about what we can do today, because this isn't going to be about selling our services. This is more a case of, if you do need that support, that you know that we're here and we're happy to help. And what we are doing is allowing people to have some online consultations free of charge, where you can book with us at any time using the links on the page. We will send that to you after this webinar. We also have a Corona Crisis Support Hub, which also gives you very discounted packages for legal services. So we will talk or send an email after this webinar. So I don't want to talk too much about that today. I'd like to move on to Hisham, so that he's able to speak to us about navigating the crisis from an accounting and auditing perspectives, and look at the considerations for change. So without further ado, I hand the floor over to Hisham.
That's lovely. Thank you, Suraya, and thank you, Richard, for a very detailed overview and guidance to everybody during these very unique times. So thank you all. My name is Hisham Farouk. I'm the CEO of Grant Thornton. I also sit on the board of Grant Thornton Global. Grant Thornton is one of the world's largest audit and advisory firms. about 135 countries, 55,000 people. And just wanted to bring this up because a lot of what we're trying to collate today and guiding our clients and the marketplace is driven by what we're seeing across the world. So it's not just lessons learned of what we're going through here. Because this pandemic is effectively impacting almost every single corner of the globe, we're able then to gather all these details and put it together. So from our perspective, when we look at kind of restructuring, there's really three areas that are key for us. And I think it's very important for everybody to look at it. And this will be the first one, which will be the operational. Then we'll look at the debt and balance sheet, and then the strategic. But if I start on the operational, and this is really where, you know, once kind of obviously this situation kicked in, most clients had an immediate requirement, which is how do they manage their workforce? How do they ensure that they're able to still deliver on the required work and meander through the unknowns that are coming to play? And an operational restructuring is really where this kicks in. It's about re-looking at your resources and seeing how best you can manage your resources through this process. And managing them in a state of, yes, through the remote work, but also by readjusting and prioritizing what your business needs today. So let's say in the normal course of business, you would have, let's say, you know, X number of salespeople, people looking at the supply chain or so on. Now, of course, because times have changed, how do you identify the best people and put them on these priority lists? And that's really where the resource management, optimization, and rotation comes into play as well. I also want to highlight something that Richard touched on, which is related to, you know, this crisis is potentially, with a silver lining, is that it accelerated a lot of the thought process that many businesses had initially, which was how are we going to get ready for kind of the future marketplace? And what this crisis is doing is accelerating that mindset, whether it's the introduction of technology, whether it's the identification that we can be much more efficient businesses. So I encourage a lot of businesses while they're going through this is, you know, as leaders, to really have two hats on. One hat is managing the crisis, but the other hat is looking forward. And that's really where this kicks in on the basis of looking at how you optimize your business for the future. If you realize that more technology is required, then how do you manage that? How do you upskill your team and capitalize on the usage of this time to do so? That all really comes into that process of resource management and optimization. Crisis management, team development is also very, very critical. And this will kick in when we touch on kind of the cash flow projections. How do you really be very, very clear on your business model to understand how do you manage and develop your team over this period? One, managing your team from a financial resource perspective is critical. May I be very clear, we are not here to advocate that letting go of people is the solution. On the contrary, we believe actually this is the opportunity to upskill and develop your people. So how best do we identify that and do this at time of crisis? And that's very, very important. The other aspect is also developing efficient internal practices. And more importantly, these internal controls to be ready for the future. So they're future-proofed. So one example right now that you'll see quite a bit of, or will eventually start hearing, is that as more and more people work remotely, cybersecurity becomes a big issue. Because now you have significant more access to your servers through VPNs. People may be sharing passwords to do potential pieces of work. Their home computers are not as secure as the servers or the infrastructure back in the office. And because of the accelerated pace to everyone moving remotely, how do you then manage that? How do you manage the internal controls on that? How do you ensure that quality and delivery of the products and services that you are executing is also reaching that quality level at the same time? So it's very, very important right now is also to look at your internal controls, your internal practices. Ensure that they're adapt and ready to manage your business today, but also then to manage the future. So again, like Richard was saying, I concur with him on the basis that I don't see us returning to a standard 9 to 5. I don't believe we'll work 100% from home either. But I think there will be a balance between the both. And with that comes, how do you then manage that processes and build that to the future? If we move on to the next restructuring, which I think is on the top of everybody's minds today, is related to debt restructuring and balance sheet restructuring. Obviously, with the pandemic that happened today and the accelerated systematic approach whereby From yesterday, effectively, most industries are not able to operate at 100% capacity, if not all. This has obviously impacted cash flow, and it has impacted kind of business operations. And many businesses here in the UAE historically have been running on kind of revolving debt or facilities from the banking sector. And now, without they're able to fulfill these obligations because of the limitations of cash flow, what can you do? We've seen very, very positive and promising interjections from the government in relation to the stimulus packages. We've seen an extension that had just come out yesterday or the day before to that. So I guess there's a significant amount of stimulus there to support where people can communicate with their bankers to renegotiate their terms, look at restructuring their debt, look at kind of cash rotations and how do you retain idle cash, whether from certain industries. So slow down, earlier loss-making businesses and focus on the ones that are in your core business. How do you make those decisions? And I think what is the most important thing as a starting point is to have very detailed cash flow projections. So for me, I think the very first step that any business should take is to build we say at a minimum a 13-week cash flow projection. Given this scenario here, maybe it could be on the 13-week, which is 3 months plus 1, and then you extend that as we progress. And these cash flow projections need to be developed through scenario planning. So right now we're looking at, for example, an absolute best case is that after 2 weeks, the effective lockdown that is happening now will be uplifted. At a worst case, this may be continuing to, a middle case till June, potentially till September. How do you build these scenarios, build a cash flow around these scenarios, each one of them, and then that will allow you to make the right decisions. It will also allow you and guide you to have the right discussions with your bankers. Because I think it's also fair to appreciate that the banks today are absolutely inundated. Almost at 100% of their clients are contacting them and asking for deferral of payments, restructuring plans, which are on a very ad hoc nature, of a simple email, of a simple discussion. And I think it's very important to understand that the banks, the banks operate on the basis of showing information and facts that are able to make those right decisions. So I think the cash flow forecast will help that in the best way possible. Then, of course, lastly, keep an eye out on the continuous of government grants. We saw the first stimulus come to the banking sector and particular industries. The second stimulus came in to potentially support the SMEs and other industries. So we will continue seeing more and more stimulus, I believe, as we continue on. And then the last point from a restructuring angle is related to strategy. So again, sorry, just the slide before this. So when you look at it from a business strategy perspective, I mean, I think we all are in agreement that the world is not going to come back to its new norms, and whether the normality and the pace of normality will come in, but we're already seeing signs where e-commerce has significantly shifted people's mindset. Online education is the education sector is no longer going to be the same. Telemedicine is going to be actively kicking in very, very quickly. So a lot of industries that were resenting kind of change were forced to change today. The hospitality sector and travel and tourism, we may see more experiential tourism and travel as opposed to your standard business travel that was there before. MICE events may be more online and digital as opposed to large, and so on and so forth. So I think all businesses which are impacted by almost all industries need to today, and we call it, a revisit of the strategy or potentially a restructuring of your strategy. And looking at what your new strategy is going to be. What new services are you going to offer to the market? How are you going to look at your business model and reevaluate your business model based on these new services and new offerings? How are you going to look at your resources and effectively then redefine your resource offering or the talent pool required to deliver these new services into the market? Your policies, how are you going to restructure your supply chain management and all the relationships you have with your existing suppliers? How are you going to communicate this to the market and communicate this to all your stakeholders? These are matters that I think have to be on the top of every leader's head today. They have to consider them, because I think any business that will believe that, come September, that they will just, go back to normal and deliver the standard products and services that they used to in January, I believe that this will not be the case, and they will be the ones that will be left And coming to your example, Richard, of the whip, they will be very similar to those businesses, truly. So I think from us as Grant Thornton, we've seen a lot of our clients come in and sorry, on the last slide, please, Suraya. A lot of our clients are asking us for support potentially on these areas. So they are looking now on cash management and cash flow management and wanting our support on putting these in place. Contingency planning, helping them with the scenario planning and looking at very different scenarios and best and worst case scenarios, but also looking at that through their whole business model and having the structures and templates around it. Stakeholder management and communicating with the stakeholders. People matters. I mean, this is a critical aspect. Don't forget that all businesses are driven by the people that are in it, and it's not the other way around. So how do you ensure that you are managing your people? You have the right policies in place to ensure you're managing them. And then ultimately, of course, crisis management. We are definitely all in this together. And so any experience or services that we have or we're learning from our clients and what we're offering to our clients, we're happy to provide to the greater market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hisham. That was very informative, and I think you kept it very to the point. I think there are pertinent issues and considerations which you touched upon. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to comment and put your questions in the question box, and we'll try to get to those at the very end of this webinar. But for our next speaker, it's His Excellency Mr. Hussain. So without further ado, I'll introduce Hussain and open the floor to him.
Thank you very much, Hisham, Richard, Suraya. I'll be speaking about the Sharjah Research and Technology Park and what we are doing in terms of really sparking innovation and also contributing to this difficult time as an ecosystem. So we started 2019 with some positive news related to innovation. The Middle East in general was picking up and venture building and innovation. We can see some promising numbers in terms of deals in the Middle East region, and that's sparked a lot of initiative around the region to really adopt innovation and create platforms like the park we have to really promote entrepreneurial people and also innovation. So as you can see in this slide, there was a growing number of deals in the Middle East region, and that's something that we started 2019 with. Next slide. Okay. We could see countries like Egypt taking leads in terms of numbers of deals. Of course, UAE has always been a crossroad for putting people together and putting deals together. So UAE as well played a big role in terms of promoting innovation. And of course, we have big economies like Saudi Arabia, which were catching up as well. Next slide, please. And as I said, the story of Kareem and Souq.com excited everyone about what innovation can bring and what successful entrepreneurship ideas can bring. And I think this is really a note that I would like to leave everyone with, is that both speakers, Hisham and Richard, touched on the role of innovation going forward. I think this is something that will definitely be promoted going forward in a big way. We all have to innovate in how we work and how we do business and how we conduct our daily activities. With all of this is in the background, the UAE government, can we go to the next level? Embarked on different strategy to promote innovation throughout the UAE and the region. And we had an innovation strategy for the UAE government, which focuses on different areas, industries like environmental technologies, production design and architecture, water technology, mobility, renewable energy, and digitization been identified as key industries that the government and global trends is moving with. And if we talk about digitization. I think that's a big topic that everyone believe that will transform, our economies and our businesses going forward. And I think our speakers today talked about how schools and businesses and basically all industries will be moving into more digital industries. So to deal with that, the Sharjah government launched the Sharjah Research and Technology Park. Maybe can we go to the next slide, please? And the objectives of the technology park is really to develop and build an innovation ecosystem that will flourish innovation and will connect academia, businesses, and private sector together in one platform with an objective of bringing new technologies into the market and creating new companies and building new ventures. And the whole idea of this as well is to generate future employment and to mimic basically what the type of employment that the future will bring basically to us. And number three, to catalyze the knowledge economy to invest in the future. The whole idea of this is also to create and design new ventures that mimics new technologies, whether into artificial intelligence or 3D printing or additive manufacturing or space. And these are the areas where we believe the opportunities really lie in the future. And these are the area where we believe that we can become more competitive and more differentiate ourselves from other parts. And these are the type of industries today we talk about at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park, and we promote as well. Go to the next slide, please. So if I just give you some example of the type of projects we currently host in our technology park, starting, for example, with a project related to aquaponics and hydroponics and agriculture technology with a company called Merlin, where we are actually testing and applying new forms of agriculture. This is a big industry that is not really tapped into this part of the world. And we believe in, for example, in the UAE almost import 80% of its vegetable from outside. With new technologies, countries like UAE can produce agriculture. So we are testing all kinds of technologies related to agriculture as we speak today. Another company that we created also is Middle East Engineering Technologies. And we started to create and print houses using 3D technologies. And we are developing softwares and also materials to support this industry and make it more cost efficient and create new opportunities. A third project which we're talking about is development of next generation transport technologies with a company called Skyway. So at the park at the moment, we are testing new forms of technologies related to transportation and new trains. These type of technology will create new jobs, will create new form of doing business. Another company is related to artificial intelligence and health and in agriculture and also in industry. So these are just examples of what type of companies and what type of industries we are promoting at the technology park. Again, I think as my colleague suggested, we have challenging times coming, but I think innovation will sit in the heart of this development. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Hussain. Sorry, thank you so much for that presentation. That was quite informative. And it's really amazing what Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park is doing. And it was great to get insight from you about that in a little bit more detail today. I think what you said, as well as what all the other speakers have touched on today, is vital, that going forward, the world is going to change. We're forced to look at how we're doing business, how we can innovate really to survive into the future. And I think the way of the future is going to be more about the technology and innovation. So all of the considerations that you touched on, I mean, Richard from a corporate restructuring and legal, Hisham from, looking at the cash flows and budgeting, your positions, your restructurings, and Hussain, of course, in terms of innovation and going forward. So thank you so much. That's all from us today. But what I'd like to do is open the floor to where have I done? What have I gone? open the floor to questions. So are there any questions from the speakers, if they'd like for us to answer on any questions, any topic? It could be related to this or unrelated. So if there is something that you have a burning question which we didn't perhaps touch on today that you'd really like for us to answer, we'd be happy to as well. Is there anything from any of the speakers? I can't see how many. From the panelists, is there anything that you wanted to add to Richard? Richard, unmute Richard.
Thank you, Suraya. In fact, as we were speaking, I can see a question came in from Mahmoud to all the panelists. I'll read the question. It says, how can we, as a legal community, provide our services and be truly effective in providing assistance to a person or organization in a major crisis because of the current events, which are considered an event of force majeure and which have paralyzed all services and government agencies as well as the courts in most of the countries of the world? One, how is that, or how can we be beneficial in light of these difficulties? And next, I think, can we really help with legal advice only without being able to do anything in light of the stoppage of most services? Well, okay, look, Mahmoud, the world is changing. The mere fact that we're communicating like this over the internet is something you probably wouldn't have thought of a year ago in relation to the provision of legal advice. And I saw yesterday in one of the newspapers in the UAE that they conducted their first criminal trial online. So the coronavirus is putting up obstacles in the way, but new technology is helping us overcome it. And certainly, if you didn't communicate with your clients now, when they're facing these difficulties, there could be a suggestion that possibly you're not giving them the sort of type of service that they're hoping for. I would suggest you write to all your clients now, send them an email to say, I'll be available online. Okay, so, sorry, Hisham, if you want to add anything on that. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Thank you, Richard. Did Hisham or Hussain want to add to that, add any points?
No, I think just in continuation of what Richard's saying, I mean, I think, you know, looking at legal professions and you know, I combine ourselves as professional service firms. And I think we have a global obligation on the basis that, you know, we have the expertise and knowledge that we've seen, you know, businesses that have gone through their own micro recessions. We've seen markets that have gone through recessions. And while this is effectively at a global level, it still doesn't differentiate that we can still provide that sense of confidence and guidance to our clients. And I think that's very, very important to remember today. Albeit, yes, we're all learning how to meander this together. But I think it's critical to appreciate that, you know, given our insights, because remember, we look out into all the various industries and all the various clients. So we have a very unique perspective of the marketplace. So how can we benefit then, you know, the world with our knowledge? I think that's very important.
Very true. Thanks, Hisham. I can see that another question has just come through from one of the participants, from Salwa Salhul, but I think that perhaps the question isn't yet finished, but I'll start reading that out as she's typing it. So Salwa has said, this pandemic reveals how crucial and fragile our economy is, especially for women, who is an economic agent and monitor, but also a responsible for family. So do you think this pandemic, sorry, it's, I'm reading as she's typing it out, will offer them new issues? I believe what she perhaps means is new opportunities. Does anybody want to take this, or shall I, given that I'm a female on this panel? I mean, Look, I think, Salwa, just to say one thing, look, women have always been seen, I guess it was a minority group, it doesn't matter what we do and what industry we move in, we're always seen, we always have obstacles that perhaps our male counterparts don't, but I don't think for one second that's really an obstacle, because women, and in many women, and particularly in the UAE, from what I've seen over the last 8 years, have really overcome the challenges that they've had, whether they be family challenges, whether they be challenges related to the workplace and being minorities on boards and institutions. What I think is women by their nature, amazing multitaskers, and also we're very innovative. Given that we always have so many challenges at one time, we innovate constantly to come up with new ways of dealing and handling the multiple challenges that we have that are ongoing. So to be honest, just like this pandemic it doesn't discriminate. Not the elderly, not men, not women, not young people. And I think it's a global challenge. So we don't have to look at this as specifically an issue for women, it's especially for everybody. But I think what we can see is an opportunity in this challenge, and see how women can use the skills that I believe we innately have to think of innovative ways of rising and creating opportunities and looking at technology. I mean, Hussain, I recall attending an event of women in tech where they looked at coding, and what women were getting into coding and technology. And so women have so many skills, and they have aptitude to learn, and they're actually more hungry now than they've ever been to rise in occasions like this. So I don't see that this pandemic is only an obstacle for women. And yes, we do have challenges, but we've always had challenges. I mean, the family and taking care of family, that's been something that we've always had to historically do and will always continue to do. But I think it's looking at how to manage the situation, having a proper structure and order. It's following a timetable, in a sense that we now have to segment, because we're working from home, so that we've got this additional challenges of looking at our workplace together with the family. I guess there is a blurring of the lines, but just like you would on a normal day, structure your life and everything you have around it. We just have to do that now, and continue to be hungry and continue to find ways to innovate in the areas of technology, like what Mr. Hussain, for example, has touched on today. So I won't speak more about that because I can see some more questions coming through. I'll just...
If I can just add something very quickly on that, Suraya, just before we move on.
Yeah.
I think it's also, we have to appreciate that this change actually, in my perspective, could actually open up greater opportunities for women that are staying in the household, working, you know, mothers that want to stay with their children. Instead of taking long maternity leaves, they can actually come back to work remotely. You know, and even if for, let's say, SMEs or startups and the ones that still want to retain that sense of nurturing and bringing up children, now they will have an opportunity to work as well. And I think that was not available openly before. So I think actually this could be a fantastic opportunity for the female workforce going forward post this pandemic.
Very true. Actually, I definitely agree with that, Hisham. Thank you for touching on that point. I believe more so than ever, if we look at it as well, I mean, just as an add-on, women are the largest consumers, regardless of what industry, but mostly in the areas of health, in the area of fashion, in the areas of beauty. And right now, I mean, women are no longer going out, for example, to shop. So they're going to be spending more, and they're going to be looking at online shopping and services for beauty and fashion. So if right now you're in an e-commerce business, or you've always wanted to start one, but you've been reluctant to, this is now the time where you can actually make those dreams, if that was something for you, actually come true. So yeah, I mean, Hisham, thank you for raising that point. I think it's a very good one. I also see that Layla Mahmoud on the panel has asked a question, and again, it relates to women-owned businesses. So I might just read that out and then ask the panel members to discuss that if they'd like to. So it says, thanks for the informative webinar. Women-owned businesses will suffer drastically during and after COVID-19. Given the special features of women entrepreneurs, what would be your recommendation for intervention to support them? I'm interested particularly in the supply chain and access to procurement opportunities. UN Women GCC Liaison Office in Abu Dhabi. Okay, So I believe that's her name. Is there anybody that would like to? I think Richard, you had your hand up to address this.
Thank you, Leila, for your question. Yes, I believe that this might be an opportunity now for crowdfunding for women entrepreneurs. Crowdfunding in particular is one of the forms of finance raising where stakeholders with an interest in the particular industry are usually more minded to invest. Small amounts, large amounts, whatever, but they're people with an interest. In many ways, like-minded entrepreneurs. And I hesitate to say this as a man, but this might be the time for the sisterhood to step up and support each other. I know from my own professional experience that in general, many women professionals have to be better than the men they're competing against. And they need support, and their worst enemies are other women. So I think crowdfunding from interested parties in supply chain management, supply chain and service industries to support new ideas to provide these online services might well be worth investigating. But basically, it's a time for everybody really to stand together rather than to try and rip your rivals apart. Thank you.
If I may, just to share with you, at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park, we have a dedicated program that we launched to promote women in technology. And I'm very proud, of course, to associate ourselves with the Women in Technology out of Paris, but also to have ladies like Suraya, and we have another lady, fascinating lady, Sophie, who owns NEPTA, which is a woman health technology company. That is based out of the park, and I think trying to do wonderful work related to women health in general. So we have dedicated programs to promote women. We'll be launching soon a program specialized for women in coding, but also we launched recently our Advanced Industries Accelerator, where we allocated a specific component for women to be part of this accelerator. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for our women colleagues to really take a step up and get involved. And I think the timing is really great, as Hisham and Richard suggested.
I definitely agree. In terms of supporting women as well, Legal Circle has a focus, I guess, largely because I'm the managing partner and I have support women, and I have throughout the career, but we have a webinar specifically about women in business and entrepreneurs and the challenges and the ways to overcome those in the coming weeks. So not this week, next week. We are yet to set a specific date for that, but we will reach out to everybody, send them over the links and invite them to that. So we'll look at specifically women-related issues and ways to overcome those in those webinars. I'll just take a few more questions because I can see here. Do you think standard documentation like the LMA will also be changed? I'm not sure what the acronym is under my, sorry, where is that? It's from Nilaba. I might move on from that. Perhaps Nilaba, you can let me know what LMA is an acronym for. I might just move on to another question. How does the current difficult situation, how is the current situation different from a recession of the boom and recession cycle? Aren't all the strategies we adopt the same when passing through any recession phase of the economy, which usually prevails even longer? Anything different in particular? I think Hisham, possibly, yeah. I was going to say, I think this could be a good one for you to look at. What does make this crisis different from, say, I believe this is what it's asking, what makes this crisis different from the previous recessions that we've had?
Well, look, I think the fundamental change in this particular pandemic, what we're going through, is that this is absolutely global. So while, for example, let's say in 2008, which is the most recent global recession we had, it still didn't impact every single industry to a certain degree. It was driven by financial services, impact the majority of industries, but not all of them. The second differential here is that because the sheer pace of change that's occurred, and it's not a matter of that you are forced because of no business operations. We are actually forced not to operate the business because of other factors. So we have to readjust, and that readjustment is what's created the new norm today. So like we were talking earlier about remote working, you're talking about new industries that will come into play. You're looking at 3D printing, for example, now. So I think it's if you look at it, the perfect storm between technology that has emerged at the right time, and then a shift in the direction of how businesses are operated, being forced to do so because they have to find means of operating in a different mechanism. So it's not a matter of, let's say, I'm selling, for example, chairs, and then all of a sudden people are no longer using wooden chairs. There's no more chairs, there's no more desks, there's nothing all of a sudden across the whole world. And so I think that kind of global shockwave has allowed the concept of this new norm to take place, which is allowing for these new industries and new means of operating to happen. I think that will be the difference in the recession. So maybe the pain points are similar to a recession in the basis of cash shortages, unemployment, and so on. But the outcome, I believe, is going to be very, very different.
Thank you, Hisham. I see that Neela has clarified her question. So the question related to an early one, are you expecting recalibration of thresholds with regard to bank standards? And so the LMA related to standard banking lending documentation, do you expect this to change? I think, Richard, perhaps you can take this one.
Well, this is a very difficult question. It depends on whether or not you trust banks.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, many banks will try to continue doing business as they've done in the past. But already, before the coronavirus hit, in the last 12 to 18 months, new players are entering the market, new providers of finance. If the governments in different countries press the banks to change their lending practices, they will change. And if they don't press them, then they probably won't change until the market forces them. But there are new lenders out there which are not traditional banks, and that might bring about a change. But this will take a lot of time, and banks, they're very conservative with a small c. They're very old-fashioned, and I anticipate that the standard loan market association documents will remain in place. It may even lead to a temporary tightening of them as the banks look for more security to justify their lending. But Hisham, do you want to say anything about that? Because you've got more experience of obtaining finance from the banks than I have.
Well, yeah, I mean, thank you, Richard. I won't go into the details of the contract. I'll leave that expertise to yourself. Yeah. But I think on an overall basis, I do see that there will be a potential shift in how banks operate. So we're not going to go into kind of a discussion around fintech and the evolution of fintech, because I think you're going to see a strong emergence around that, depending again how the currencies evolve after all this. But I think just how the banks naturally operate, I think there will be a significant change in how they operate, because don't forget, this has also elevated the situation of a lot of businesses that did have revolving credits or facilities, and just given a very short glitch in operations, put them at jeopardy. So I think a lot of the banks will revisit and relook at how that operates.
Definitely. I can see that there's another question. Crowdfunding is an excellent idea. Any advice on existing platforms of crowdfunding initiatives in the UAE would be great. What we can do is, Layla, we can send an email over and I guess identify for you the different crowdfunding initiatives. I think that's best to send her an email and have those listed, because crowdfunding is a little bit of a grey space at the minute in the UAE. So there is laws around that kind of restrict crowdfunding, as we know in say typical other markets typically. So Layla, let's send an email to you on that. If there's anybody that wants to add anything to that. I think she's also said, I'm interested in identifying partners that would be perfect. Many thanks. Okay, great. Excellent. So they've just sent emails through. So if we don't have any further questions, I think we can wrap up the discussion today. I do see that we still have a number of participants on. And thank you very much for staying with us. We do hope that you found this informative and useful. If you do have further questions that come to mind after this event, please feel free to email us. So you've got the emails on the slides, which we will send over to you. This webinar is also recorded, so we can send that through as well. Thank you very much, Hisham, for joining us, and Richard and Hussain. I see that he's possibly dropped off, but I can have a discussion with him after this. So thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this informative.
Thank you very much.
And we'll send you an email with
Richard,
the upcoming webinars. Thank you so much. Great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.